What if the life you planned vanished overnight? For Marisa and Britt, it was painful chronic conditions without cures. We lost everything: our health, independence, careers, and even our sense of self. But in the wreckage, we found something unexpected: a chance to rebuild. Welcome to I'd Like to Unsubscribe, the podcast for anyone feeling stuck, lost, traumatized, or just straight over it. This isn't just about surviving illness or trauma. It's about ditching the toxic beliefs holding you back and daring to dream again. We're bringing real talk, hard-earned wisdom, lots of sarcasm, and practical tools to help you rise. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and you'll remember, even in the darkest moments, hope is still alive. Hello, everyone. I just want to welcome you to our very first episode of I'd Like to Unsubscribe. And today's episode is I'd Like to Unsubscribe from the life I thought I would have. And we are just so grateful that we get to spend some time with you. And we just want to thank you because Britt and I know that there are so many amazing podcasts out there and people that you can listen to, right?
Oh my goodness, yes. There's so much out there, and we're just so grateful you're willing to take some time to just chat with your girlfriends.
100%. So I want to warn you, put on your seatbelt, because Britt and I, when we were talking about topics, we decided to dive headfirst into one of life's least favorite party guests, and that is grief. But please, don't click off. Spend a few minutes with us. I know this is a topic that can be really hard, and sometimes you just want to run away because it can feel just overwhelming. But we have some good stuff for you today. And there's a really important reason why I think that we decided to start here, Britt, because grief, whether it's from, say, a chronic illness diagnosis or a breakup, or you just lost your job, or you just said goodbye to someone that you love, it's something none of us get a free pass on in life.
Yeah.
We will deal with it over and over and over again. But I believe that the more that we understand about grief and how to support ourselves during it, the better equipped we are for the next time that we find ourselves in it, because there will be a next time as long as we are living. Grief is really messy. It's hard. And I know sometimes for me, when I'm in it, especially in the years past, I always felt like I was sort of fumbling my way through it, and it just felt so overwhelming. And I was working really hard to process it all, because I think back then I thought there was a really clear other side to grief, which today I can say I don't subscribe to that theory so much. Now, some of you may not be familiar with Britt and I, but long story short, we both went through getting diagnosed with these incurable chronic diseases and dealing with some really heavy traumas when we were pretty young. And honestly, the grief wasn't just about those things on their own, though. It was so much bigger than that, because the truth is, illness and trauma, they don't exist in this vacuum. They spill into everything: how you see yourself, our relationships, our plans that we had for the future. It's like this domino effect. And suddenly you're grieving all of these other things in your life that you didn't even know were connected to the initial thing that you were grieving. For Britt and I, it was definitely, I don't want to speak for you, Britt, but I feel like we know each other's stories so well. It was definitely like loss of career and our identity, loss of independence. I mean, for both of us, that loss of mobility, like something so simple that we were able to do every single day, right?
Yeah.
And our relationships. And it was a lot to carry.
Yeah. Oh God, truth girl. I mean, good freaking grief, right? I mean, let me tell you, in the beginning, when I was first diagnosed, I had to step away from my career. I was working as a child abuse attorney. I had just adopted my daughter. And all of a sudden, here I am having to move away from my home. I had to step away from my job that I really, really loved. And I had to move in with my parents and hire a nanny because I couldn't care for my kid anymore. I mean, I cried about my diagnosis so much because I had seemingly in my mind, I had lost everything. I had lost my identity. I had lost who I was. And I thought, oh man, I got giving myself this pep talk and thinking, great. Like this, all this is done. Like this is done. What do I do? And I thought once I had cried about that, and like, oh, I was sad, for a little bit. I thought, okay, well, I'm good. I cried about it. Everything is good. But it turns out grief just doesn't work like that. It's not a one and done thing. It sticks around, it pops up when you don't want it to. You're watching a
Yes.
commercial, and all of a sudden you're crying and you're like, why am I in this pit here? Um, so that's kind of what we wanted to sit around and talk with you about. This is two girlfriends sitting around having coffee. And guys, I had my first couple sips of actual decaffeinated coffee that I've not had for a decade today. So this is for you. So all the energy you're feeling, like this is all of that because we want you to know, of course, you're sad. Like this is your permission card from the entire world and very specifically us. Of course, you're sad about this. This is hard and it's okay. In fact, it's more than okay if it's hard for a really, really long time. And
Yes.
I really want you to understand that this is not a one and done situation where you get a diagnosis, you cry about it for a little bit, and then it's fine, and then you just move on. This is kind of permanent.
Yep.
And the weight of that can feel really heavy. And we just want you to know that it's okay that you feel really sad. And there's nothing wrong with you. And it's not like you're just trying to, be sad or keep yourself back. This is life and it's okay. It's your permission card.
And I'm so glad you started there, Britt, because I think a lot of us put so much pressure on ourselves and we say, why am I like still so upset about this? Or why can't I just like get over this? All right. Our society has this, you and I talked about it, like these sort of time frames, like, well, shouldn't you be over that now? Because you're kind of like
Mhm.
killing my vibe, right? But the
Yeah.
reality is, like, our brain sometimes creates this false belief or perception that grief is just this thing that's like it comes along, we process it, we tie it up in a really pretty bow, and poof, we put it on a shelf and it's gone. But there is like a reframing that has to happen in our mindset. And I think that happens over time and like working through stuff that you don't simply move on from this. It's not like a checklist, but rather we sort of build a life around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think, we as a general society, especially in America, do such a crappy job at learning how to sit with somebody in grief. And I think even particular, even like the more spiritual sector has even a worse time because we want to make it better because we're super uncomfortable with pain and we're super uncomfortable with people who are sad because we just want to feel good, right? That's our natural inclination. I just want to feel happy, and you're making me not feel happy right now. So I just want to push back against that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think people give us maybe some, grounds to feel sad. But what if that sadness lasts more than a couple weeks? What if it lasts more than a couple years? What do we do with that then? And so then do we start to kind of push it inside of us because we don't know how to really handle this and we are seeing our people and they don't seem to know how to handle this, and so we start to internalize the grief, and then what happens when we internalize grief?
As you and I know, when we internalize grief coming from two girls that have already illness issues, what happens, right? We get
Yeah.
so much more sick than we had been, right? Like the
Yes.
physical symptoms are undeniable, and there's so much research, and we're going to talk about that later. The mental implications of it all, right?
Yeah.
But it has to go somewhere. That's the thing. It's
Yeah.
either going to come out, we're either going to work through it, or it's going to actually like physically affect us. Again, like I want to bring that back to what type of grief are we dealing with? Because Britt, you said something to me off mic a while ago and that really resonated. And you said something was along the lines of like, we've unintentionally treated grief as something that's only reserved for these grand visible losses. And I reflected on that because the truth is, yes, Society undeniably recognizes and expects us to grieve these major visible losses, like these seismic events that the whole world can relate to, right?
Yeah.
But what about those quiet, more intimate losses that we face on our individual journey and the ones that people can't see? And it made me think about, are we conditioned then for the subtle losses that people might consider them subtle losses, that we're supposed to endure those in silence and in isolation? And I'm going to use grief tied to identity for this example because identity grief is something profound that just turns someone's world upside down, especially when they're diagnosed with an illness or they experience trauma. If we look at it in the framework of psychology, it's this mourning process that we go through because you feel like you're losing a part of your self-image or your identity, right? Because you went through this life-altering event or you got this sudden diagnosis that you weren't expecting or you had some type of trauma happen. And the reason why it hurts so much is because you literally feel like you're losing your old identity and you feel like you're
Mhm.
losing control of everything around you and your purpose. But if you think about it, right, you suddenly get diagnosed like we did. Our life turns upside down.
Yeah.
You lose your job. Maybe you lose like your finances, and you actually sometimes lose that ability to do the work that you had done for so long that defined you. And what about in cases like us when we lost our mobility and that independence just slipped away? And then you have to start relying on people like all around you that you never really needed to rely on before. And
Mhm.
I remember for something like that that happened to me years ago when I was so sick at one point, like I had a nurse that would come to my house 3 days a week and like she would have to help me shower and brush my teeth and get dressed. And these were things that I did every single day, didn't think twice about them, right? So
Yeah.
the reality is, these aren't just minor inconveniences and grievances in our life, right? They become like these cascading crises that are nested within this larger crisis of losing yourself.
Yeah.
But society doesn't necessarily hold space for this kind of grief. I'm realizing it, not in the way of, say, when we like lose a parent, which I did. I've dealt with that when my dad passed away, and that grief felt very different. But because society doesn't necessarily hold space for things like identity grief, I think that's why so many people struggle to even acknowledge their right to grieve this monumental life change. It's like that absence of societal validation makes the loss feel almost less real
Yeah.
when in truth it's really deserving of being recognized.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, if someone hasn't said this to you before, like, we see you. The fact that society has not called this a level 10 loss doesn't mean that you are not internalizing this as a level 10 loss. Like, this is a complete rebirth for you, and your body is going to experience it like it is a significant trauma. And so, if someone has minimized that for you, if someone has not given you the space that you needed, or if that someone is you, where you've been minimizing your own trauma, I just want you to know, like, we see you. We see you today. And it's okay to recognize that as major trauma, as a level 10 loss, because that's exactly what it is. I love this quote from Dr. Earl Grolman. Grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity, the price you pay for love. Like, the only cure for grief is to actually grieve. Do you hear that? It's the cure for grief is not happiness. The cure for grief is, in fact, grief. It is a super natural response to loss. I used to think, as we were saying before, like the body had levels, like it's almost as if it
Mm.
instinctively knew, like, well, this is just like a kind of like a sad loss, but this is like a pet loss, and this is a person that died loss, and so your body is gonna only, adjust to the level, I'll only be this level of sad and tired because it's this level loss. It just does not work that way. At least it's never worked that way in my body. And
No.
I want you to know, I'm coming in, and Marissa, we're coming in this week with significant loss. I lost someone I loved 2 weeks ago. Marissa is struggling through loss right now too. And we're like, man, we never thought when we decided, hey, let's start super strong, right? And let's start with grief because clearly we don't care about our subscription levels, right? Like, let's start super strong. But we didn't realize we'd be walking in having to talk about grief in the midst of loss. And trust me, it is not just associated with death. And I feel that in my body the same way that I feel about the identity loss. You can have it through infertility, job loss, and all that. But remember, grief isn't just reserved for those moments, too. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the stages of grief, there are 5 of them. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was the first to pen the 5 stages. In grief, they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. When I was first diagnosed, like I was saying, I could barely care for myself. I had tons of medications that I was taking, and they were taking a significant toll on my body. And they were kind of helping, they kind of weren't helping. And it was really, really intense for me. And I really felt like a victim of my circumstances. And I mean, I laid into that. I cried so much. I was so self-focused in the beginning on how all of this made me feel. I really didn't have a lot of space for my people and what they were feeling. I had a young daughter and my husband, and I had very little for them because I was so trapped in my own grief. How was I going to be something now? I mean, here I am laid out. I can't even care for my own daughter. I'm an Enneagram 3, and if you guys know what that is an achiever. And like, for heaven's sake, how in the world was I going to do that again? And I sat in the sadness of that. And I used to think, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I should have pushed through, right? I should have proven to my family and my friends that I was stronger than this. I shouldn't have given so much space to this. But let me tell you why. And now that, that look back, the 2020 look back, why it was okay that I did that. And I'm not just trying to give myself permission for bad behavior, but let me tell you why I think that was okay. I think the God of the universe created emotions. And so before Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross even penned the stages of grief, God had already created that cycle in our bodies. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross only identified a system that was already in place. She didn't create it. The divine had already done that for us. And if you've put your faith in something higher than yourself, I think you can identify the goodness of what that is, that it's okay that you are angry. It is okay that you're sad. It's okay that you're trying to bargain and, well, God, if you do this, then I'll do this. Or if I could do this, then this. Like, all of this is really okay. And I want you to know this too. And whether you believe in a divine or not, you need to hear this. God is not going to smite you. He's not going to hurt you or be angry with you for going through any of the stages of grief. I don't care if you say all the big boy language in the world at him. He knows. Guys, pain sucks. Jesus had a physiological response to stress. He sweat drops of blood out of his body. I mean, I've never even gotten to that level yet, and I've been under some level 10 stress. He gets it. Jesus cried. Jesus felt abandoned by God. Jesus couldn't even carry his own cross because he was that weak and that needy. We recognize, and God recognizes, you're doing the best that you can even if you're not able to give space to other people's feelings right now. It's okay. You'll get there and you're loved and God loves you.
And I'm so glad that you brought just faith into it, because Britt and I know not everyone that's listening has the same faith, and we're here for everyone. We're just sharing our experience. But when I listen to you talk about like these physiological responses to stress and grief and how it can make us feel and how it can make God feel, and it just makes me think about our friendship over the years and how different like you and I are. God's created us both in such a beautiful different way, and like we laugh that Britt, she's the crier, and that's wonderful, and I tend to retreat and get upset and angry, and I kind of shut down, and we're trying to figure these things out. But I will say, to combat that, my reaction, years ago, I threw myself into talk therapy because I wanted to find out, especially after my diagnosis and when I was sick for so many those years, those first years, why was I so angry, right? Because
Mm,
it's not like I wake up in the morning and I'm just like this angry person, but that therapy became such a transformative experience for me, and it taught me so much about grief. And one of the most profound lessons I learned is that those stages that you just named of grief, they aren't linear, right? People
yeah.
move through them in their own unique way. Sometimes we go back and we revisit a stage that we thought we completely left behind, we were done with, and sometimes we skip some. But what struck me most, though, is how grief can coexist with joy and moments of beauty, and they can
Yeah.
happen independently and at the same time. And
Yes.
I remember how I'd find myself in the midst of something wonderful, like something that filled me with happiness, and yet I'd still feel like this weird pang of anger. And I'd ask myself, like, how can I be in the middle of something so amazing? And yet I feel like I'm still carrying this anger from years ago. And through years of conversation with honestly one of the most incredible therapists I've ever had, I came to understand that the anger that I was feeling, it wasn't truly anger. It was actually heartbreak.
Yep.
And that realization reframed so much for me and helping me see grief and like processing it wasn't like this neat series of steps that we have to get through, right? But it's
Yeah.
this deeply human experience. And I truly had to wrestle with that word, heartbreak, when we finally unearthed why, like what is at the root of this anger.
Mm,
And my therapist told me that anger is often a secondary emotion, right? It's a mask for something deeper that we're feeling. And we just peeled back the layers and we started teasing it out. And there, it just like stared me at the face, right in my face of just heartbreak. And when I think about heartbreak, it's such a familiar companion to so many people that are living with chronic illnesses. And over the past like 20 years, I've spoken with thousands of people that are part of the lupus chick community. And I witnessed this profound,
mm,
quiet grief like again and again. And it is the heartbreak of what could have been.
yeah.
And this endless cycle of these what ifs that can often haunt us, especially in the beginning. And it's the heartbreak of questioning ourselves and wondering, did I somehow cause this? Like, am I
Oh, yeah.
sick because I did something? Which it's as irrational as that might sound, like we think that at times.
Yep.
Um, and it's the heartbreak of reconciling like what our daily lives have become now
Mm,
compared to the dreams that we had. And those dreams can seem really distant. And it's the heartbreak of watching our bodies, kind of feel like they're
mm,
betraying us, and you feel
mm,
like your vitality is, like, slipping away and your future is uncertain, and none of those what ifs are small losses, like, those are all big things, and they
yeah.
reverberate into, like, our entire world. And, I thought about all of that. And when we're asking ourselves like all these what if questions and we have all these fears that they just kind of come crashing in and we're
Mhm.
feeling like just sorrow, it can feel really unbearable.
Yeah.
Um, it can feel like it's just too much, right?
Yep.
And is it any wonder that like we're grieving and we're kind of stumbling and like through all of it, right? What society so often denies, especially I think to people with chronic illness, like in that very moment, is the thing that you actually need the most. And that is you have permission to grieve all of
Preach.
this stuff. And it's a
Preach.
lot, right?
Yep.
To truly acknowledge like the depth of your loss and give yourself the space to mourn that. So, like Britt and I want to tell you very clearly, like if you
Yes.
take nothing away other than this from this episode, if you feel silenced or you feel dismissed right now, and people in your life are telling you, like, come on, it's been a while. Like, you got to get up, you got to get moving. And, I
Mhm.
do think at some point, right, you do have to get up, right? But you have permission to grieve.
Mm,
You don't have to just suck it up and put on this brave face. You can actually stop and tell yourself, like, this pain is real, it's tangible. I feel heartbroken, and I'm
yeah.
allowed to take some time right now in my life to honor this.
Yes. Oh, exactly. Because here's the thing, guys, and I say guys because I'm from New England, but sorry about that.
Both of us, yes.
But let me explain to you why we're kind of harping on this and decided to start this topic this way. Because if we don't allow ourselves to grieve and we suppress that, then our bodies are going to do it for us. Our minds may not do it, but our bodies will do it regardless. So you're never going to get a free pass. When you emotionally suppress grief, that can lead to the feelings of obviously numbness and detachment. I think we've all experienced that. By avoiding the pain of grief, we unintentionally also suppressed our ability for joy and love and other positive emotions. The problem is this, that if you suppress one emotion, the place in the brain that stores them gets rid of all of them, right? You can't just be like, you know what, I'm just gonna toss that one out. That one's just inconvenient. So I'm gonna just push anger here and grief goes over here, but I'm gonna keep the fun ones, we'll keep like joy and silliness. It doesn't work that way. You suppress grief, you suppress joy. That's how it works in the body. So I didn't make the system. It's just how it goes. So
Mhm.
obviously we know if you suppress grief, mental health issues, right? We have a pandemic on mental health issues. I just heard a quote yesterday that it's 1 in 2. So 50% of our young population, young people, are dealing with anxiety right now. That's
Wow.
crazy. And obviously on such an uptick since the pandemic. So mental health issues, if we ignore our grief, they're going to come out as depression, anxiety, substance abuse issues, post-traumatic stress. Obviously, there's relationship strain. Everybody understands that. You're going to have communication breakdowns, emotional distance, conflict is going to happen because
Yeah,
relationships rely on vulnerability. And if you've shut down your ability to connect with your emotions, there's no vulnerability there. It's gone. There's an inability to feel like you can move forward. You feel stuck. You're going to feel stagnant. You're going to feel like I can't move on. You're going to have all sorts of physical symptoms. And y'all, we don't need any more of those. Like, that's just no more of those, please. But
for
if
real.
you do not grieve, it's going to come out. Have you guys ever heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score?
Oh, one of my favorites.
Girl, if you have not, you need to check it out because this is going to be such a telltale book for you on what the body does when you do not process things out. So, if you have unresolved grief, it's going to have symptoms like fatigue, headaches, muscle tensions, you don't want to eat or you're eating too much, poor sleep quality, insomnia, diarrhea, stomach pain, digestive issues. Obviously, your immune system is not going to be working at, full tilt. You're probably wanting to sleep more. And then also know this, constantly waking up between a 3 to 5 window is your body's way of telling you you have unprocessed grief. We don't need more physical symptoms. We
No,
just don't need it. So, this is why we have to work through our grief. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just cues that your body is going to give you. So, tune into them.
I just want to jump in real quick, Britt,
Yeah.
and then continue. But when you talk about like all these symptoms, right? So many of us already deal with so many of these symptoms, okay, that
Mhm.
have a chronic illness. So it's like you're giving yourself this double whammy of, am I in a flare? Are my symptoms all of a sudden getting worse? Is this something new coming on? Right? Like,
Yeah.
because maybe we don't even think, no, I've just been holding all these emotions
Yes.
and so we actually start treating ourselves as we're getting like that. We think we're getting more sick. We might go up on our medication. We might go to the doctor,
Yeah.
and it might just be really an emotional tie at
Yeah.
that
Oh my
point.
gosh, it's such a great point where you're thinking, oh man, I'm having a flare up when in fact it's a flare down because grief has been just stuck in you. So, yeah, don't be your own worst enemy because I think sometimes we think, and I know I've done this, right? I'm fine. I'm fine. That we think it's a sign of strength, right? Oh,
Yeah.
how are you doing? I'm fine.
Mhm.
I'm fine. I don't want to inconvenience you. And so we hold this in, we hold the I'm fine, card in front of us over our face to hide the pain because we think I'm going to be brave about this. And I love the shirt that says my tummy hurts, but I'm being real brave about it, and but that's what we're doing. Oh yeah, well if I say that I'm fine, I'm handling it. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're actually not handling it, the I'm fine is actually not a sign of strength. It's really a sign of weakness because once again, I'm here at 3 a.m. and I'm up. And I don't know why,
Right.
but obviously it's because we're not allowing ourselves to grieve. Allowing ourselves to grieve is an essential part of our healing and our growth. And guys, if we can connect the two, that by grieving, we're actually healing, because isn't that what we're all trying to find? Like, we want
Mhm.
some beautiful cure, right? Like, is it pig's blood? I don't know. Like, what are we, we're trying to find these things. We're trying all of these supplements. We're doing all these crazy things. I mean, I traveled 2 hours to go to some random person's house to hold these two metal sticks because somebody said it would help. And then look back, it was crazy, right? But like, we're willing to do that, but we're not willing to sit down and cry.
Right.
Do you
Yeah.
see, So it's really important to acknowledge and to honor our feelings of loss. We need to seek the support from others. We need to engage in healthy coping mechanisms. But if grief, and hear this really, really loudly, right? If grief becomes overwhelming to you, or it's significantly impacting your functioning, and remember, like Marissa said, look at your symptoms. Don't always think that it's just a flare up of your chronic illness. Also, think maybe this is impacting my daily function because it's grief. You got to look at it that way. Seeking professional help, like
Mm.
I have done, like Marissa has done, it's going to be pretty essential. Seeking professional help from a therapist, a counselor, a spiritual advisor, these things are going to be really beneficial for you. Because although
Yeah.
we want the stages of grief to be super linear, like we're just gonna fly through the five because I'm an overachiever, so I'll just get to acceptance, like it's as if it's something to achieve in the end. It's not some multi-stage video game. You just get through and then you like claim the flag. Like I want it to be like Mario, but it's not. They are in fact cyclical, and I mean, I feel like, man, we're already hitting them with some with some amazing things, but unfortunately, you can go back to other places. It's not like, oh, I finally got to the bargaining stage, and so I'm never going to go back to anger. It just doesn't work that way. But do know this is your hope beacon. At
Mhm.
each pass through the stage, you're going to uncover more things. And as you uncover more things, more healing is coming. So it's not this, I went back, I'm going backwards in my healing. You're actually going back to heal something that's still there so you can go forward. There's always a forward momentum within the cycle. I have a daughter, she's going to be 10 years old, so we're turning double digits. And man, she has such a really hard time expressing her little feelings.
Mhm.
And it's really hard. It's sweet because Marissa and her have a really sweet relationship. And so she always like she wants to talk to Auntie Marissa, but she wants to tell her things. But even with Auntie Marissa, she can't really express how she's feeling because she always just wants to feel happy. Her emotions feel super big to her, so she becomes instantly scared by them, right? Does anybody feeling like, oh, maybe I see myself a little bit here, right?
Mhm.
So she shuts them down. Like she shuts that crap way down. It's just like that feeling comes up and she's like, boom, like it's not going to happen. And it's maddening as a mom to sense something in her like, oh, like something's wrong, but then what I get back in return is, I'm fine, mom. I don't want to talk about it. Right. Because I think sometimes our people recognize within us that something's up, but we're coming back at them with the I'm fine, right? The strength in us that we think is strength. Like, I'm fine. I'm fine. I don't want to talk about it. But what that actually means is I am not, in fact, fine. And I don't know how to talk about it. Or if I talk about it, I am going to break down and that terrifies me. See, that's the undercurrent to
Mm.
I'm fine.
What about the I'm fines and you've have talked about it in the past and that person was so uncomfortable because grief is so uncomfortable in our society and you felt worse after that conversation and it's like, okay,
Mhm.
I can't talk to anyone about this.
Oh, yeah. The people that aren't safe to talk through emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and that I wish that I could say otherwise. Like, no, 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 just keep moving through. But there are people who are unsafe. And I think that's why this is a movement for us, not a podcast, because this whole place here is to be safe,
Mhm.
right? whether we're speaking to each other on the platforms, whether you're interacting with us, this is a place to say you are safe to feel what you're feeling. And if
Yep.
you don't have somebody in an intimate space with you that can do that, I think that's why finding that therapist is also going to be super important for you because you have to find somebody safe. You have to process through this. Like Marissa said, I am the crier, and I'm pretty. I mean, girl, give me some credit here. I haven't cried yet.
I know, you're doing, like, amazing, although
I
I don't mind when you cry, like, it's a beautiful thing, which is
thank
that's how
you.
you express your emotion and, you
Oh
know?
yeah, I cry when I'm happy. I
Yeah.
cry when I'm laughing. I cry when I'm sad. Like it's just like it's fine. Like I cry, and I think I do well with sharing my emotions, and I
Mhm.
don't let them fester because they're always like right at the surface. But I basically only do it because really, y'all, I'm just terrified of getting more sick. Like I'm
Yes.
gonna cry, so I'm like I don't want to have that negativity stay in my body. I like my baby girl am so really scared. Like, can I be honest? I am terrified of feeling sad. This week, I knew that I was grieving the loss of my friend, and I was like, I don't want to be sad. I'm gonna go do this. I'm gonna distract myself. And I should be sad. I should be sad, but I'm terrified of feeling sad. And man, it's really hard because I'm so used to being anxious, but sad is different. And so when I think about it, I'm just like, get in the car, you old broad anxiety. Like, I'm just like, I don't care, like anxiety is just a part of who I am. I see you, boo. But sadness, I want to run away as fast as I can. Like, I'm done. I'm done with it. Okay, so some real talk here. And I can tell this story right now because we're on the other side of it, but I could never tell this story before without just the most intense breakdown. We could not have babies. And that pain of loss was so significant for us, but there's going to be more on that down the road. I distinctly remember the day the IVF doctor told me when I was on my way home from work. I'm driving and I get this phone call, and we had just finished our IVF round, and we are waiting to see, are we gonna have, some embryos here? And he told me really directly, you will never have a baby.
Mm.
Like I have seen what you and your husband have combined one of 8 times in my 40-year career.
Wow.
You will never have a baby. All 8 of those people, if they ever got pregnant, never carried to term, it will not happen for you. You must go adopt.
Wow.
I mean, you don't get more direct. Like
Right.
this guy did not want more of my money. And I just drove home. That was a Thursday. I took Friday off of work. I drove up to my friend up in North Carolina. I think I got pretty drunk. And then I came back and I never mentioned it again.
Mm.
I just was fine. I took a long weekend. I took a couple shots and everything was fine, right? Because I grieved, right? I took a Friday off. I cried with her. So I was fine. And yet, fast forward, right? Couple years later, and every time I'm at a friend's baby shower, I'm over there like, drinking like a fish at a baby shower, right? I'm crying my eyes out after every birth announcement,
Yeah.
and I'm okay, right? And I really want you to understand this really distinct difference that I did not know until I could do the look back, right? Continuing to walk forward does not mean moving on. So I just want to let me just sit with that again, right? Walking forward does not actually mean moving on. And I need you to know the difference with that.
No, you mentioned something there that's really important because, like in your instance, it was this doctor telling you that you're never going to carry a child.
Mhm.
And so you said, like, you went away and you cried for a day.
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe that's when people sort of like lock that up and put it away and they think they're finished with it. But then we have all these additional moments for the rest
Mhm.
of our life, right?
Mhm.
That when you do get that baby shower, or which is like, what about social media? Like, same, I'm
Oh,
going to share a
yeah.
little bit of my story, but I feel like everybody's pregnant, right? The entire world
Mhm.
is pregnant. And having these like
Yeah.
wedding style maternity shoots. And I'm like, I'm never going to experience something like that, right?
Yeah.
So all of these sort of like little triggers are going to come up over and over and over again. And that's why I think it's so important for us to truly like grieve what that event is in our life. Because
Mm.
like we have to prepare ourselves for all of those other times that it might come up. And what I've realized is now that I've actually done the work on a lot of things, I'm able to process that grief and that trigger moment a lot easier and a little bit more quicker than I was in the past when I hadn't yet like
Yeah.
fleshed through the grief.
Yeah.
Because it isn't just gonna the baby talk isn't just gonna end after you got out of the shower and you had your cry, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like forever. And Britt, that story really does hit home for me. And you and I have talked about this like in our friendship. And I feel like just the topic of like infertility and having children or not having children and living with a chronic illness, like that is an entire podcast and conversation on its own. But
Yeah.
I feel like there should be a universal acknowledgement, like a compassionate societal statement that says, like, and everyone should hear it. If you've been diagnosed with a chronic illness and it has
Mhm.
robbed you of that opportunity to either have a child of your own and the family that you may have been dreaming about since you were a little kid, that
Yeah.
is a devastating loss.
Yeah.
And you deserve the space to grieve it
Mm.
whenever and however many times that it surfaces. For me, I
Mm.
was never able to have children of my own because of just lupus and trying to get it to just calm down and maybe go into remission. And then I was on like certain medication that you can't really get pregnant, you shouldn't get pregnant on. And I told myself, like through my 20s and 30s, it did not bother me. But then I entered my 40s and it hit me in these really weird ways that I wasn't prepared for. And I think it's because I was around so many of my nieces and nephews. And even now, like I realize that particular topic in my life is not something I've probably fully allowed myself to grieve
Mm.
because those emotions feel so overwhelming and raw that they actually
Mm.
terrify me. And when I'm around kids and then I'm alone afterwards, like, and I just kind of brush up against the edges of those feelings, like you mentioned earlier, like I start to literally get physically sick in my stomach.
Mm.
And I almost feel like my body is rejecting the weight of that entire conversation. And it's such a complicated pain. And I think a lot of us women that live with chronic illness, we carry that in complete silence.
Oh. Okay, so this is where the tears are gonna come because I wish I could give you a hug right now.
Sorry. Don't make me cry, girl. Don't make
Because
me cry.
oh, girl, because like, I'm so sorry you carry that pain because damn, you are such like, your relationship with my baby girl, like, you get her in a way other people don't, and you would be such a freaking good mom, and that's a weight, and that's hard, and that's hard, and I just want to hold space with you in that, for sharing that, and being vulnerable with us because damn, like, that is hard, and I see you. Um,
Thank you. I
yeah,
appreciate
this is my hug to you right
it.
now.
And I love your kids. It's like having just a lot of different kids, right? They're just not mine,
Yeah,
but I love them. They're special. Like they're so special to me because they just bring something really incredible to my life that I don't have.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, grief hits us in so many various ways, and it's such different times, right? And nobody grieves the same, right? So don't, let's not like, put some shade on someone who's not following the 5 steps, right? We are triune beings. We are spirit, soul, and body, and we do not mentally feel an emotion. We do not also physically feel. They come together. We experience them together. So this is not a shocking statement because I know we've all experienced, right? You've got to get up on the stage and you have to speak, and all of a sudden, like, I need to have diarrhea, like we feel the tightness in our chest when we're under stress, right? We get tension headaches after a long day at work or when we're been with our kiddos for too long, right? Our bodies and emotions work together in tandem. And Friends, we have all endured so, so much in the last few years. The pandemic alone would have been enough. Masks alone would have been enough. The quarantine alone would have been enough. But most of us didn't just experience those things in a vacuum, right? We experienced job loss, transitions, anxiety, depression, loss of joy moments, cancellations of monumental events in our lives, raising our children in an ever changing, crazy world. My daughter had to start kindergarten with a mask on. It's crazy. We're
Yeah.
dealing
What
with
about all the
chronic,
divorces,
yeah, yes,
right?
exactly. The chronic illnesses, the major and minor diagnoses that took up our emotional and physical space while our world is in flux, the unhealthy relationships that we were in, right, the divorces that came up, like complications with our marriage. And even if you didn't go, for the papers, I mean, it really exposed some of the underbelly of what was really going on in your relationship.
Oh, yeah.
And with all of that we have carried in the last few years, we are tired. Or is it just me? Are you not tired, Marissa?
No, girl, I need like a 4,372-hour nap.
Thank
Like,
you.
seriously.
Yeah. There is not enough concealer for the level of bags I have under my eyes. We had a 45-minute conversation yesterday about
Mhm.
concealer, right?
Yes.
Like,
Mhm.
this is
Like,
where we're at.
how many layers do you need and what products and how many different colors, depending on
Yeah.
what shade you have going on under your
Yes.
eye at the time?
That is
Mhm.
that's the barometer of the day, right? How many layers of concealer do you have under your eyes? Yeah, that's it, right? This is a five layer day.
Mhm.
So like of course you are tired. Like friends, this is a lot to carry. Of course you're grieving. This isn't like are you grieving? Of course you're grieving. Of course you thought your life would not look like this. In your 20s and your 30s and your 50s and on, wherever we're meeting you. Your heart is heavy from your own pain and the pain you're seeing in the faces of all the other people around you. And we see you. We see you.
It has been a lot to carry. And you mentioning that, I want to actually take that word and I want us to use it like in a way to just sort of propel talking about carrying it
Mm,
and recognizing that you can still have beauty and joy and those moments in your life while you're
yes.
carrying it, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because you carry it and it shapes us and it actually helps us like bring us to this very moment in our life and we're able to look back and we are able to see how much that we have endured and what we can endure. And so, Brittany, I love a good metaphor.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use a satchel for this story or backpack, whatever you want to call it. But if you're listening, I just want you to just stop for a second and I want you to picture grief as this satchel, right? You sling it over your shoulder and it's there. You didn't ask for it, but you have to keep it there. And in the beginning,
Mm,
it's so heavy and it is filled with these massive sharp stones. And every time you take like a little step, they beat against your back and they scrape
mm,
you and they bruise you. And like you don't want to take one step forward. It's so heavy. And you think, how am I even going to make it like one step? How will I even make it to tomorrow? I remember thinking that when my dad passed. And as time continues, something happens and something shifts. And you learn how to carry this satchel and you figure out how to balance it with the rest of your life. And those sharp edges of those stones, they smooth a little bit over time, right?
mm.
Because you have to have that time element with grief. And they smooth as you shed those tears, and they smooth as you remember these beautiful memories, and as you create new beautiful memories, and as you find new joy. But the thing is, the satchel, like it never goes off your body after that. It almost like blends and melds into your skin. It becomes this
Yeah.
part of you. And some days it will feel really heavy again. Like I know for me, when like that anniversary date comes around, or like last
Yeah.
night I was singing and all of a sudden I was thinking about my dog that passed, that was with me for
Mhm.
17 years. He was like my son. I mean, I know it sounds
Um,
crazy, but it was like this 17-year relationship.
yeah.
And then some days it feels a little bit lighter.
Mm.
And like
Yeah. Thank God for those days.
Thank God. I mean, because yeah, God does bless us with like that life isn't always so heavy. But even the stages that you mentioned earlier from Elizabeth, she even said, the reality is you will grieve forever, but you will rebuild yourself around the loss. And I use that specific story about the backpack because when I was early on in my journalism career, I wrote a story about getting diagnosed and I used the backpack as my example because so Brittany, you know this story for me, but there's this really specific date on the calendar and every single year as that date would come closer, I would start to feel this dread
Mm,
because that date, which was April 23rd, was like this just I don't know, like this tombstone in my mind almost of like, that is the day your life changed, Marissa. So you
mm,
had the before version of Marissa and the after version of Marissa.
mm, mhm.
And that day used to feel so heavy. Like there were times that I just couldn't even get out of bed on that day. I was so upset and I would cry. And now, like I actually celebrate this day because I've done that. I've done a lot of work. But it almost feels like a triumph to me because I realize now, like looking back, I should have never medically survived that day,
Yeah,
period.
yeah,
And everything that happened to me on that day, even though like a lot of it was horrific and traumatic, like it has slowly brought me to this very moment, right? It is part of
mm,
the reason why 24 years later, this podcast even exists. And I would not be who I am right now. I would not be where I am right now if that specific April 23rd didn't happen in my life. And through so much personal work and therapy and my faith and God helping me like reflect back on that day and focusing now on this gratitude that I really got this like immeasurable gift to live another 24 years when I should have died.
yeah,
Like I gladly carry that satchel now because it is a part of me and
mm,
I'm grateful to God that with his help, like I was able to grieve it properly. I still grieve it at times. I mean, every
yeah,
April 23rd, like it's, I know like I get ready for it. I can feel it.
yeah,
But he's really helped me reframe my perspective on it, right?
yeah,
And that April 23rd story sort of highlights the title of our episode. I'd like to unsubscribe from the life I thought I would have because
um,
even though this journey has been incredibly hard and it's been filled with so many challenges that have tested me in ways like I never imagined,
mm,
I'm so grateful for my life today. And I will, I'll be honest with you. I'm extremely blunt. Like, is it the life I originally envisioned so many years ago? Like, absolutely not. Like I had this whole plan. It was ridiculous. But my life is beautiful and it's messy and
mm.
it's imperfect. But I've learned a lot of resilience and I've experienced a lot of love and I want to honor it. Like I want to honor it and I don't want to take any of it for granted.
Yes. No, I love that you brought up that quote by Dr. Elizabeth because yes, you will grieve, but you will rebuild. And that's gosh, I feel like I get goosebumps. Like it is so yes, like that. Just there's something in your soul that just gives it like sigh of relief, right? Because y'all, we've hit you with some stuff today, right?
Yeah.
We're poking at some things I'm sure you've been trying to put into like really pretty boxes. Like, this is the box marked infertility, and I'm just going to package that. I'm going to stick that here. And this is the box marked I couldn't work anymore. And I'm going to
Mhm.
put that up on this shelf. And we want to put them away because we don't, it feels so overwhelming to have to like take those boxes out and hold them, right? And so I'm sure you're probably feeling like, seriously, guys, like why am I here? Why am I listening to all this? Why am I
Yeah.
taking down all these boxes? Because we want you to know this is how you heal.
Mhm.
And once you grieve, you will rebuild. We promise you that. It doesn't feel like it. Sometimes our feelings are real a-holes.
Sure.
You will rebuild. And Marissa and I are living testimonies to how often we have been in situations where we've been like, I can't come back from this.
Mhm.
I don't know how to come back from this. I have nothing in my toolbox. on how to make this work. And then it does. Because here's the hope. You will rebuild. You will rebuild. So we want you to leave you with a few things as you're kind of walking through the next week of, what do we remember here? Walking forward does not mean moving on. So we want you to take a quiet moment this week to ask yourself, where have I continued to just walk forward, but I've not actually really moved on? And you ask yourself,
Mm.
what am I grieving right now? Like, Marissa, what are you grieving right now?
I love when you ask me questions on the spot. Um, okay, what am I grieving right now? The last, I'd say, few months, and I feel like it's hitting me like more and more, is you'll get to know us obviously as the podcast goes on, but my mom and I are super close. Like she's my very best friend, and we have basically lived together my entire life. And she lives with me now, and I take care of her. And she was like my entire life, like this superwoman and just like working like 2 or 3 jobs. She was a single mom. Like we went through some really hard times in our life. Like we struggled a lot. And like she was unstoppable, like this woman. And now I'm sitting here and I take care of her and I'm watching her slow down. She's very different now, obviously, at her age. And I think it's like a constant reminder because obviously a lot of us, I'm in my 40s, a lot of us don't live with our parents, but taking care of her and having her here every day, it's just like this reminder of because we do get these reminders every now and then, but
Yeah.
it's this constant reminder of like life is short
Yeah.
and I wanna spend as much time with her as possible, and I wanna, like, have experiences, and, like, I just wanna soak it all in because like my dad, like, I know she's not gonna be here forever.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, y'all, we have to ask ourselves these questions and pretty consistently, and not just about one area of life, to sit down this week and say, what am I grieving?
Mm,
Where am I feeling things in my body? Right? Here's some things like to cue yourself in. If you're just the ones who are just like, I'm so shut down in my brain that I'm not grieving anything. Okay. Well, what about this? What do you find yourself crying over?
mm,
Is it like a TV commercial that has like, Pampers babies, or how about shows that have moms playing in the yard with their kids and like running around? Do you find yourself getting a little choked up? What about, movies that have people overcoming the odds?
yep,
Ask yourself, why am I moved here? Like what gets stirred up in me? Because if there's something stirring, then maybe there's some hidden grief you may want to explore so that you can actually get healed from it. And
yeah,
again, girl, of course you feel sad. If you didn't feel sad, you probably aren't human or you're some sociopath. We got other
mhm,
issues there.
yep,
The way you're feeling is okay. It doesn't matter how many times you cried before you could go about your day. It doesn't
yep,
matter how many pills you had to take to try to ease all the pain and discomfort that you're in. It doesn't matter how many breakdowns or breakthroughs you had in a day or even in the last hour. It doesn't matter how many times you had to actively force yourself from your bed.
mm,
All that matters is the fact that you are doing it. You're doing it. Is it hard? Of course it's freaking hard. Like, of course. Do you wish there was another way? Girl,
yes,
get in freaking line, get behind me, right? Like, but you are doing it. I want you to see that you're doing it. And that's what
yeah.
matters.
You said something like, what is sort of sticking with you in a moment that you're like, "Okay, maybe I actually need to grieve this." Like, is it a commercial or is it something? But if you don't even know, like sometimes we just don't even know why we feel so sad or angry. I think it's helpful at times. Other people can be a really good mirror in our life.
Yeah.
And if someone says something to you, like maybe it's your partner, and they say something that just sort of sets you off, and your response is like, I'm fine. I don't need anything. I'm good. Right. Like when you have these little moments in your life, like I know it's hard and you don't may not think of it in that second, but maybe you'll reflect on it like back when you're in bed. But just think like, why did I get so snappy, or why did that make me feel a certain way? And because I've had that happen to me recently, and I had to step back and think to myself, like, there have been parts of my times in my life where I feel like I'm not heard, and I feel
Mm,
like I'm not even believed, like, especially in the world of, like, chronic illness, right? I've had,
yeah,
like, a
yeah.
million doctors when I was younger be like, "No, no, you're good. You're okay." We'll have that conversation another time. But, like, sometimes other people can also be a mirror, so I just want
Mhm.
you to consider that. And
Yeah.
again, as we start to draw the first episode to a close, I wanted to just kind of think about, like, some constructive ways that we can also reframe our understanding of grief in our lives. And Brittany and I talked about a lot of stuff today, and I want to honor this time that we have together. And so I sort of fleshed out a couple of perspectives that you can look at grief in. And, one of these might sort of, I don't know, just really hit home for you. But first, like, in our life, we can look at grief as a guide, meaning that it can illuminate really what truly matters to us and
Yeah.
reveal, like, our deepest priorities. Like, losing my dad, it is a guide for me of how I want my relationship to be with my mom while she's still here. So it is 100% a guide for me.
Yeah.
And grief can also be a bond, right? Because it preserves our connection of what we lost, and it serves as this reminder that we loved, we did love, we still love, or we had a life that we held dear. And grief can also be a passage, okay? It weaves the past into today, and we can create space to honor what was while just guiding us into what is to come in our life. And last, we can look at grief, I know for me, as an opportunity to grow in faith. And none of us are promised this life that is free from sadness or grief, but we are promised an immeasurable hope. And that is a hope that is so great, it can't even be grasped by our human mind. And if
Yeah.
you are in that period of mourning and grief, and you feel so much sadness, like David did in the Psalms, I want to tell you, you can pour out your heart to God just like David did,
Mm.
and you can bring him your pain and all of your questions and all of your struggles. I mean, I did. I certainly did when I was in the hospital by myself
Yeah.
late at night. And while our society might still be uncomfortable talking about or acknowledging grief, the wonderful thing is, like, we have a God that isn't. We have a God that will never turn us away. And he never shames us for what we're feeling and how
Mhm.
ugly it is. And, it reminds me of that quote that you shared with me, Britt, the other day from Brene Brown. What we don't
Yes.
need in the midst of our struggle is shame for being human. And oh my God,
Oh,
it's so
Renee.
true. Yes,
Mhm.
go Brene,
Yep.
because God will never shame you. He will never tire of you talking about the struggles that you're going through. Like, you can let it all out. You're not going to surprise him. That's what I want to say. You're not going to surprise him. I do
Yes.
believe that God is a place of safety, and you can be vulnerable, and you
Mhm.
don't have to censor yourself because you're not going to make God uncomfortable. You
Yeah.
can express how you truly feel. You might make your family or a friend
Mhm.
uncomfortable. You're not going to make God uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and you will find comfort there. And Britt and I know that not everyone who listens to this podcast shares the same faith as us. And I get that telling someone to pour out their heart to God, it might make you feel really
Yeah.
uncomfortable. It might make your brain kind of shut off. And I understand that because I definitely have been there at one point in my life before God ever even was a part of my life. But I want to tell you, that person, like, if you're listening, there are other ways right now that you can share your heart and you can work through that healing process. For example, there have been many times in the past, like every year, I usually go on a trip with a ton of my friends, and sometimes I'll go on these girls' trips, right? So just a bunch of girlfriends, and we're all so different. And a lot of us come from different faith backgrounds, but we'll sort of create like these little events that we do with each other and these sort of like rituals of remembrance. And
Mhm.
sometimes we will sit there with like dollar store notebooks, and we will write down like everything that we're going through or just something that's really big in our life right now. And we will go outside and we'll have a drink and we'll sit around a fire and we'll cry, like a ridiculous amount of crying. Me, not so
Mhm.
much, but we, some of us will cry and we'll laugh and we'll have this like wonderful hot mess of a time, and
Yes.
then we either rip that up or we burn those papers. Some of them, like me, I like to actually keep them because I like to go back and look and sort of see like how far I've come. But
Yeah.
you can create this ritual of remembrance. And I just want you to give yourself like that space to figure out like what would be a really good way that I would feel comfortable expressing this.
And that's such a beautiful reminder because that's where we're trying to get to, right? We're trying to get to acceptance. And the rituals and the reminders are such a valuable part of that. And we want you guys to come back next week as we continue this depressive pep talk to give you, a hug. But that's what we're going to be talking about. How do we get to acceptance? How do we actually work through all these feelings in order to get to this point where I can look at this disease and I don't say, I hate you. Look what you've done to me. But I can look it in the eye and I can shake its hand and say, you can come for the ride. I value what you're bringing now and I value myself, and I think that that is going to be so essential for us because y'all, we couldn't have a podcast talking about how to unsubscribe from all the things limiting us if we've not actually looked at the things limiting us
Yeah.
and cried about them.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why we had to start here. So we're sorry, but we're not sorry, right? Because we have to start here because you have to learn to let go before you can grab the hand of what's in front of you to keep going. We've talked about a lot of amazing things, but I really think picking up a copy of The Body Keeps the Score is going to be really valuable for people trying to figure out what is the connection between my brain and my body. And how can I learn when maybe my brain is telling my body some things, my body telling my brain some things? It's going to be really essential for you. I just think that that's going to be a helpful clue in when we're a little clueless. And I
Mm.
loved what Marissa had to say. Joy and pain can be held in the same hands simultaneously. They're not mutually exclusive of each other. This is how we walk through life in the best and most productive way by holding the hands of both and realizing they can both exist in my path and in my story at the same time. And then we
Yes.
want you to subscribe and follow this movement as we sit and we chat at the table here together with you as our tribe to let you know that you're not alone. You don't have to walk alone through all of this.
You said something, and I know that it might seem like for the first time, if someone's hearing it, just like uncomfortable, but like telling grief, like you can come for the ride, right?
Yeah.
And it makes me think of years ago, and it just popped in my head, and I haven't thought about this in so long. But years ago, I used to think of like when I was grieving and just the lupus and, finding out that I had a brain aneurysm and just all this crazy stuff. Like, I felt like I would describe it as like it was sitting in the front seat with me every time I was in the car. And it's like I would look over at it and it was like telling me what to do, right?
Yeah.
Like how to drive. It was just always there and it felt so close and just
Mm.
like I couldn't get any space from it.
Yeah.
And then years later, I would describe it, I would say, "No, I feel like now it's moved into the trunk." So it comes with me. It's like always there
Yeah.
on the ride of life, but I made a little extra space now that I can put new things next to me in the car, in the back seat. Like there's more room
Mhm.
there, but it hasn't
Yeah.
left. I didn't kick it out of the car. It's still there. It's in the
Yeah.
back though.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and is that not true what you were saying with the Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross quote, right? You're going to keep grieving. Y'all, so this unfortunately doesn't necessarily end. But right, what Marissa's saying, where's it sitting in your car? Is it on your lap?
Mm,
Is it in the driver's seat? Is it, next to you? Is it in the back? Is it in the, way back? Or is it like attached with like a U-Haul, right?
yeah.
Where is it in your seat right now? Because like the quote says, yeah, you're going to grieve, but you're also going to heal and you're going to rebuild.
Amen. Amen, girl.
This is
Preach
going to happen. And this is why we're here,
Yes.
to not have necessary answers for you, but to like just cheerlead you along the way. There's going to be days where it's going to feel like I've made zero progress. There's going to
Mhm.
be days where it's going to feel like I sprinted like Usain Bolt, and that's okay. And that's why we're here. And that's why this movement is here. And that's why this community is here, because we know we're going to rebuild together by unsubscribing from the things holding us back. So come back on our next episode for a word hug. We love you, Tribe.
We do love you. Thank you so much for being here.